Well, the holidays have come and gone once again, but if you've forgotten to get that special someone in your life a gift, well, Mint Mobile is extending their holiday offer of half off unlimited wireless. So here's the idea. You get it now, you call it an early present for next year. What do you have to lose? Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
Limited time 50% off regular price for new customers. Upfront payment required. $45 for 3 months, $90 for 6 months, or $180 for 12-month plan. Taxes and fees extra. Speeds may slow after 50 gigabytes per month when network is busy. See terms.
Wild food doesn't look the same today as it did even 5 years ago. What used to be a quiet fringe thing, something you learned from a few books, a few mentors, or a few lucky mistakes, is now everywhere. It's on our phones, it's on our feeds, it's in restaurants, it's even in pop culture. People are butchering deer on Instagram Live, dry aging fish at home, harvesting invasive species on purpose, and questioning where their food actually comes from in ways we haven't really seen before. So today, we're stepping back and looking forward at what wild food might actually look like in 2026, what's growing, what's fading out, and what we might be getting completely wrong along the way.
Join Justin Townsend and the Harvesting Nature crew as they explore the world of cooking wild fish and game while sharing recipes, tips, tricks, and lessons learned from their pursuit of wild food. We sure hope you ate before the show, 'cause you're gonna leave hungry. This is the Wild Fish and Game Podcast.
Today's episode is all about the future of wild food in 2026. Over the last few years, this space has moved fast. Faster than I think a lot of us expected. Foraging has gone mainstream. DIY butchery is everywhere on social media. Indigenous foodways are finally getting the attention and respect they've deserved all along. At the same time, new laws, new technology, and new pressures are shaping how we hunt, fish, and forage in real ways. We're going to get into some of the ways that wild food world has been changing due to the new trends, media, and technology. And we'll play our hand and make some predictions for 2026 and maybe a little beyond as well. If we zoom way out, what does wild food feel like right now compared to even a few years ago?
I think that it feels way more public than even a few years ago. I think a lot of this stuff used to be pretty quiet. You learn from a buddy or a book or a mentor or a magazine. You might see hunting a little bit in like old Norman Rockwell painting or something, but now it's all part of like scroll-based media. So everyone's seeing everything. That includes the harvest, the mistakes, the wins, and even the flexing, which I see a lot of. And what's interesting is that this is happening in kind of two directions at once. You've got some of the most traditional food practices imaginable, like right from the beginning of our species, foraging, hunting, fishing, and they're all being reshaped by algorithms and drones and apps and social media, like all these very present technological things. Yeah, and it's really changing the landscape of everything quickly, too.
I would throw in there, too, like, even technology for food itself, right? Let's talk about the sous vide. Yeah. Let's talk about dry agers, vac seal bags.
Umai bags, and so many different things.
Yeah, ikejime, the popularization of that kind of around the globe as a way to prepare, fish a little more. Like, you never would have heard of that before. And I think it's all reshaping our food pathways. But what do you think is really trending as we push into 26, and what do you think we're leaving behind in 2025?
There's a few things that stand out to me that I've been noticing. One, people care way more about meat care and fish quality than they used to. And I'm not talking about everyone, but you're just seeing this like growing group that really cares and puts way more care into their meat care and fish, and including the ikejime, including dry aging and all these different techniques. Like, people are really paying more attention. It's not just like a deer you drive around for 2 days showing off and huck into the freezer for your wife to cook kind of thing. It's really growing into an appreciation for those ingredients. I've also really been noticing that Indigenous foodways are going from kind of like an inspiration to actual leadership in the conversation, really joining or being allowed to join the conversation, even though they're the ones that really have the most to impart. And 3, like we were saying, tech is driving driving big change in the wild food world and maybe coming up against a wall of, lawmakers and traditionalists and things are mixing and not everyone kind of agrees in the direction where it's going. So it'd be interesting. I think there's also more expectation that you actually understand where your food comes from culturally and ecologically and not just how to cook it. So it's becoming a more holistic thing. As far as what we're leaving behind in 2025, I get a sense, and I really truly hope this is true, that the pile of dead animals in quotes area is fading. People are way less impressed by sheer volume and of limiting out now. They're more impressed by what you do with it. So how it's processed, cooked, shared, respected. You can really see this in the wild food world as opposed to the hunting media world, which I think are still kind of separate. There's a kind of a Venn diagram, but they're two different worlds. But in the wild food world, you can really see pioneers like Hank Shaw, Larry White, Jesse Griffiths, and what we're doing at Harvest Nature and everything. Really paying very close attention to the food itself and how they transform it. You rarely see a pile of dead animals with their thumbs, the guy standing there with their thumbs up on social media from these kind of people. And, having said that, there's definitely less tolerance for reckless behavior or sloppy meat care, bad fish handling, or posting illegal stuff without realizing it's illegal. Like, I think people are really, the community is beginning to police itself a little bit and not allowing a lot of this stuff to get through. So yeah, there's a lot of changes. I think it's going to be interesting to see what's happening in 2026.
Yeah, I think it's interesting from a perspective. We talk about social media a bit, and we follow them too, Harvest Nation, the Hunt Quietly guys. So it's Matt Ranella, Steve Ranella's brother. And it's interesting to just see kind of like, I think largely famed, one for being Steve Ranella's brother, but two, famed for his rants on sort of the celebrity hunters or like the over popularization of hunting recruitment, which is not a unique voice to his own. We talked with AJ DeRosa, and he mentioned a comment in there about being originally asked to be a speaker at the R3 community and then sort of like changing his thoughts and opinions on that. And we didn't peel the onion back as much, but I think largely you look at the outdoor industry itself and like its involvement in pushing recruitment and retention and reactivation, the R3, and just kind of where their role is. And that sort of examines, if we get into like, what is it? Big outdoor, I don't know what we can label them as, but it's another like interesting place we find ourselves in because of that and the recruitment. But I do find entertainment value in Matt Ranella's postings and rants and his team's movement on that, while also recognizing like they're trying to promote hunter access in not an oversaturated way, but also to like the flashy dead animal posts on social media. I think we moved, I hope largely away from it a while ago of just, the traditional grip and grins. I think people post one every now and then, and yeah, sure, whatever, that's part of your story. But I think that is like a reason to get likes and followings and stuff like that. I'm not sure we're quite in that position. I think ours is more from a storytelling perspective, but yeah.
Yeah. I think we actually get way less engagement and way less followers that way, but I'm okay with that. I'm okay with not using dead animals to kind of push our I don't know, make money off it and everything. Like, I think what we're doing is kind of sticking to our guns in that respect and hoping that culture kind of follows suit, but we'll have to see.
Yeah, I think the story's a little different.
Yeah.
But I think there's always people in the space that are going to do that. And it's whatever, it's sort of part of the narrative, right? But
yeah, it's part of what everyone's doing, but
I think that, but you mentioned sort of like that checks and balances, the people posting illegal stuff without realizing that. That's really interesting because I've seen a lot of like action from the wildlife agencies on those too, of like seeing people posting things on social media and being like, hey, wait a minute. That's an interesting perspective just from like a privacy standpoint of like just examining that and unpacking that, which we could certainly do, but it doesn't as much revolve around food of like how much of the wildlife agencies are popping around on, social media pages and things like that.
It's definitely happening, and not even just them, but the self-policing community as well. Like, I think people are saying, that's illegal, you can't do that, or there's things I've heard of people being allowed to use a secret hunting or foraging spot or fishing spot and then posting it online, and then it gets flooded with people, which is not cool. So yeah, there's been a lot of like self-policing in the community too, which is, I think, is good to see. It's good to kind of get those bad actors, clear them out, don't give them a platform anymore.
Well, I think, and you have that happen in person, right? In a micro scale across communities across the way. I've heard stories of like this guy parading around this, this elk he shot and it turns out to be a moose, and somebody in a bar calls Fish and Game, and all there's like these stories that roll around too. So
it's just been happening in a broader
more
scale,
public
way.
Yep. Which is also too, like, from my perspective, if I ever post anything on there, I'm very cognizant of, like, I'm not sharing location. I'm I'm always very cognizant to follow the rules and laws and regulations, but I'm like overly cautious of, like, I don't want to be called out, like, is this something it's not, and things like that. So it gets it's very dicey very quick,
because people do call us out on stuff, like when we make a mistake. We get called out on it. So, and I'm good, I like that keeps us in check too, and tries to keeps us honest, keeps us doing the right thing, I guess, even though I think we're likely to do the right thing anyways, but
what's that sort of perspective we bring of, like, journalistic integrity, of going the next way to make sure your content's not just sort of valid, or that your content's not just entertaining, that it's in fact, like, valid and truthful and all that. I think that's something we all bring to bear.
You can really see that in the, like, online butchery, do-it-yourself kind of world right now.
Which I definitely want to talk about that. So we can't talk about wild food without talking about online butchery. It's, like, everywhere. Our buddy over at the Okayest Cook was just doing a podcast, like, live breakdown as he went through this venison quarter, which I thought is super cool. And we've had our own series on butchering and things like that. So, like, the whole deer breakdowns, cutting steak, making sausage, dry aging in basements, new products like the umai bags, the whole aisles of new gear at the big box outdoor stores. Like, people are definitely tuning into their own processing. I see that too, and also that it's just a general decline of, I think, processors and butcher shop from a commercial standpoint, that it's making people have to sort of re-examine that, and people are reclaiming the skills that really disappeared, like, a long time ago, which I think is really phenomenal, because they're taking the time to understand the cuts better, they're wasting less, and they're not as scared of the whole animal anymore, and I think that's really, really good. So hopefully we've played our part in that to sort of affect those trends. I think there are a few downsides to it. I'll say, like, there's a lot of misinformation out there that's not correct, that are being shared, like, really widespread, through the social media groups and pages, and instead of somebody, like, searching on the internet and finding a credited article or going and looking in a book or a magazine, they're really turning to a couple different perspectives. And one is that, like, mass social media post, like, you're part of a hunting Hawaii page and you post hey, I just shot this animal, what is this thing? Or how do I do this thing? And then you get 50 comments on, like, all kinds of stuff. But we pay attention to those, and we've queued up some articles, but everything from, like, icing game meat, soaking game meat, storing meat in trash bags, choosing grinder plates, like, meat yield, aging, hanging meat in a refrigerator, how quickly should you skin a deer, like, adrenaline, why don't people eat deer fat ratios, safe temperatures, tanning, skinning, grinders, organs, dog treats, deer fat, rendering, hanging the deer from the neck or the hind leg, like, all these topics I've seen over and over and over repeatedly, and people are just like, there's so many perspectives, and a lot of it is not accurate, and I don't know. I think as a community, like, talk about that policing, like, I've seen the pushback on soaking game meat more and more and more.
Yeah,
like, there's definitely
there's it elsewhere now.
There's one guy out there who has this video which he loosely based on, like, a scientific method and a taste test and testing of the way that he, like, did a side-by-side cooler, one just sitting on top of the ice, not touching the ice but on racks, and the other one, like, submerged in the ice, or the ice with the cooler tipped up so it can drain. And then he, like, checks the temperature and does all this stuff, and then he goes and he, like, does a blind tasting with all, a neighbor's block party or whatever, and everybody's like, oh, I actually prefer, this one, and it ends up being the one that he'd soaked in icy meat water, which I'm still like, I don't know. There's a cringe factor for me, just because I know what that turns to, and I've heard it over and over and over, the defense of that. Anytime I post, I generally see him post back, and then a bunch of people are like, well, I did this and I did that, and I've been doing it for 50 years, and yada yada yada. And it's just like, when you get down to, like, really the details, it's not great still.
Yeah.
That's my rant on meat soak.
To cap it out, I just want to, like, if its experiment was to taste test it with a bunch of neighbors who probably don't eat wild game, then they probably would choose the one that had the least flavor out of everything.
Yeah.
Which would probably happen if you soaked it in gross ice water. But anyways, that's...
I would say this also to the other kind of downside, I think that, and this is that like collision of technology and the outdoor space, mainly like from the butchering perspective, is that people are learning from like 30-second videos and thinking they've like mastered something that actually takes like years and years. So hygiene, temperature control, bacterial growth, just hitting on all that and what we just discussed. None of that's flashy enough for the reels, so it just gets dropped. So people just have this assumption of like, oh, I'm just going to go do this thing. And they do it. And there's the result becomes, sickness or illness or sour meat or whatever. And then that sort of sours the perspective of the participant. So be careful, like understand the whole process, I guess, at the end of the day. There's also the hack culture. It's the mentality that creeps in from these short videos and fake how-tos. Everything has to be a shortcut, faster, bigger, louder. In truth, like real butchery is the opposite. It's slow, it's quiet, it's deliberate. Like each knife stroke, each movement is thought. It's about a process, like end to end. I think the same goes for fish. I think with fish, though, we're seeing a shift of how we care for fish. Techniques like ikejime, the dry aging, those are sort of like moving from the background into the mainstream. And I think that's a really important conversation because the discussion about fish feeling pain is also resurfaced, showing that ikejime is a much kinder way to handle killing a fish rather than let it flopping around in agony in the bottom of your boat while it suffocates or clubbing it to death. Like the fish spike, I think the paralyzing wire, I forget the exact names of all the different tools, like the bleeding at the gill, even the way the fish is oriented and handled, while it's alive at home, is gone from sort of like whatever to a much more gentle and nuanced approach, which is better for the fish, better for the environment, and much, much better to eat. And this goes against the sort of like tournament style fishing, the whack 'em stack 'em types where you see the big like dead fish layout and everything, back on the dock and all that. So I don't know.
Once you've eaten properly handled fish, it's really hard to go back. It makes a big difference in that fishiness and all the off flavors and the texture. Yeah, it's hard to go back to it. Where do you see all this kind of heading in 2026?
I think honestly, we'll see a split. I think some creators are going to lead harder into education and craft, and others are going to lean harder into spectacle. And that's that entertainment factor that they're seeking. That's the likes, the thumbs ups, all that. I think at the end of the day, everybody's looking to carve out their little space in the niche, right? Everybody's looking for the attention, for the article, for, the book sales, the podcast listens, the t-shirt sales, whatever. But I think people are definitely going to start to recognize the difference. And once they find themselves a regular consumer of whatever media that company's putting out, the validity becomes really apparent when you start to dive deep and read between the lines. And I think there's always going to be that split. I think it might widen a bit because I'm seeing more of the educational side, and people, maybe you're doom scrolling at 11 o'clock and you're at night and that's the entertainment side. But when it comes time to get down to it, like you're seeking out those resources from the educational perspective to like do the things you need to do, whether it's the cooking, the processing, even hunting information itself. But I think what becomes a little more challenging is just social media itself and the way that your feed is sort of driven by the algorithm, that you may or may not see the things that you think you want to see because it's going to tell you what you want to see. And so if you slow down on one post that's like, I don't know, a guy like overinflating a football till it explodes, like that could just be part of your feed for the next couple days, and there's nothing you can do about it anymore. And
you get your attention distracted for a moment, you look down, you're like, no, it's been sitting on this stupid post the whole time. That's all I'm gonna see.
Your house phone rings and you pick it up and your phone's just there like playing this video 20 times. You're screwed. But I think like from our perspective, I would like us to push back a bit against sort of all of it, against AI itself, and just the the domination we see in the space, but also to like pushing through sort of some of these myths, some of these missed conversations with providing like the actual educational resources. You know, we've done a really good job about it for, you know, the last decade or more. And I think just continuing to do that is even more important and push that. You know, I think two major speed bumps that a lot of, I wouldn't say outdoor media, a lot of like the blog sort of revolution, and we've talked to Hank about this, was like when Google's AI summary came out, and it started to summarize multitude of articles at like the top of the search page versus like letting people click into the articles. I think across the board, everybody saw dips in traffic because why click into a page when you can just do that? My daughter will come to me and be like, Dad, check this out. And she'll tell me something. And I'm like, is that something that like Google AI told you? Or is that something that you like went in and read? Like you need to fact check that and like go in and actually read the article or do it, because it does miss the boat. Despite being, I just heard this last week, I think it was on my way to work, the Google Gemini AI outperformed OpenAI's ChatGPT. So it's now ranked as the most proficient AI platform on the World Wide Webs. So despite all that, it still misses the mark, I would say. And then the other perspective was like what we just talked about, that social media, a logarithm kind of has changed the way people are sharing content and like what's pushed to you. So you may not always get the most accurate or true information. Like there's no sort of fact check mechanism anymore. It's all community regulated now. And we sort of see how community regulation goes sometimes. So all the 30,000 suggestions telling you to soak your meat in Mountain Dew. Yeah. Like
it'd be interesting to see how AI changes things too, because I think people are leaving social media in droves, especially like Facebook and other platforms, Twitter, X, whatever, just because of the slop. It's just nothing but slop on it anymore, and you can't even see what you want to see on it. It's just you're fed this stuff. And with AI, like all the crazy stupid shit you can do with it in terms of making entertaining videos, which a lot of people are doing now, I think the entertainment side of the wild game world, where people are just watching videos for entertainment, is going to shift into slop, and might hopefully put an end to some of that stuff. Hopefully like organizations like Harvest Nature will be there waiting for people with real knowledge, real people making recipes, like not AI slop, and physical media, stuff like that. We'll be waiting for people to come out of that, because I don't think it's going to be sustainable.
Yeah, I don't think so either.
Yeah.
You know, and it's, while it is entertaining, right? You've got the moose that comes up on somebody's porch during Halloween, and then the thing pops up and the moose falls and knocks out the whole banister and puts a dent in their car, and then you look down and it's like, oh, that's a complete like AI video like that, you know, whatever.
And it's going to be nothing but that. So
yeah, it's an interesting time. What a time to be alive, Adam.
I guess that kind of ties into one of the other big changes I've really been seeing in the wild food world, and especially actually in just the last few months, which kind of shows that it might be trending into next year. It's been like a shift in Indigenous voices in the wild food world. Kind of the antithesis to all this like AI fucking nonsense that is just you were being inundated with. And these voices have always been here, obviously. But I'm suddenly seeing like Sean Sherman, the sous chef, speaking on the Daily Show about his new cookbook, Turtle Island, and talking about like food sovereignty and native food and traditions and all this stuff. And it's just so good to see it being brought into the mainstream, actually, not just kind of in the background. I think that's huge. And the wild food scene in North America didn't start with people like me. It didn't start with Instagram, and it didn't start with cookbooks. It's like tens of thousands years old. And these Indigenous cookbooks and voices that are coming out aren't just like recipe collections. They're like reminders that wild food is more than just food, is culture and place and responsibility, which is a huge one. They're also challenging how casually people treat Indigenous food knowledge and traditions. Like just take the ingredient, take the flavor, and move on. You know, they're really challenging that mindset. And this is interesting too, because it's, you know, Indigenous food, it's having a moment in the limelight, but it's not a trend. It's like an actual living culture tied to land access and history and treaty rights and clean water and wildlife populations. And you can't really separate the food from all that. And it's just something I've been really loving seeing out there, is the voices that, you know, should be leading the conversation, they're finally been allowed to join the conversation, you know? And yeah, I just really like that. Where do you see this trend heading, Justin? Like, is there anything you're seeing in particular in the Choctaw community that you're part of, or the broader Indigenous community?
Yeah, I think no, it's really a time. You know, I love Sean's sort of perspective on it, where he's talking about, you know, why isn't there a mention of like, oh, I'm going to go eat at the Native American restaurant tonight, you know, just as sub in Italian or Mexican food or whatever. Largely throughout, that place is sort of starting to come around, and you know, like you mentioned, that food has always been there to an extent, right? Like there was definitely a purposeful movement to extinguish it because you know, the food and sovereignty are hand in hand, and I think by removing a lot of the elements of food and creating a dependency on, you know, the commodity system and, you know, government rations and things like that, that you have to have a forced re-examination of what food looks like. I remember, we'll say 2012, 2013 maybe, I was starting to work on an indigenous food project with one of my friends in California, and our goal was we were going to go around and collect, you know, recipes from all the federally recognized tribes in North America. And cool. At the time, that presented itself to be a bit of a challenge, and so we were trying to work through that, like reaching out, cold emailing people, hitting up community centers on reservations, like as much as we could. And it was really, really challenging. You'd get something back like roasted duck in cream of mushroom soup.
Yeah.
Which,
or fry bread or something.
Yeah, you know, and those things, yes, while those are parts of our culture, we were looking to dip our toe back in further traditional things. And I think those sort of stories and traditions were nestled with a select few, and we've kind of had like a reemergence of that. But also too, I think, you know, largely I'll put Sean Sherman and, you know, a handful of others at really the helm of driving those indigenous conversations, pushing forward into mainstream media, which is sort of like popularized it, but also popularized it from the perspective of we have to have a respectful conversation about this, and like the dependability of food, and like really what food means to native cultures and how to shape that. Because you know, I'll say this too, it's not all like unicorns and rainbows and Lucky Charms on, you know, the side of reservations. Like food is still very much a challenge, and the availability, like there's a lot of people going hungry, you know, in many, many parts of America, and many, many of those parts are on reservations. And I think there's still that availability. There's food deserts. We talk about all those sort of things like that happen, and that makes that more challenging when you look at it and you're like, oh, the indigenous food world is really great. Well, there's still a lot of problems with it too. So
yeah, it's really cool to see. Not only is like people like Sean Sherman pushing the indigenous food to people like to non-indigenous people and allowing us to become part of it, which is cool. But he's also opening it to indigenous people who've had their food history erased, and they're giving, you know, he's giving back something that can be latched onto and brought back into the modern era, where there's this huge gap in between where, you know, food was taken away and people weren't being raised, like being taught how to properly cook it or what's actual real food, you know?
Yeah.
So it's kind of empowering communities to take that back again and redevelop their own culture with it, which I love to see too. It's cool.
I think, yeah, it's very, very cool. I think within, you know, even with that, within the sort of like Choctaw community itself, like one of the big things, so Ian Thompson, he works with the tribe in their historic preservation office, actually interviewed with him out of college to go work for them, and ended up not getting the job, which worked well because it ended up bouncing around sort of the U.S. But he redesigned and revisioned his Choctaw food, remembering the land, rekindling ancient knowledge. Really cool book. I'm waiting for it to come on online order so I can pick it up, but that's definitely like, I'm excited to see that because it's like one of the true like I guess authorities on sort of Choctaw traditional cuisine, which is really, really cool. So, and it goes, you know, it goes past fry bread, it goes past all those things, and really dives deep into like also preparation, not just like here's a modern version of a traditional dish. It's like, here's how it would have, you know, corn would have been dried and pounded to make hominy and things like that. So like really, really deep dives on some of the techniques from a historical and anthropological perspective, which I really appreciate.
I have to pick that up. I love that stuff.
The other thing that is going on is we talk about treaty rights. So there's still a battle between the state of Oklahoma and the 5 civilized tribes in Oklahoma. The 5 tribes signed a compact amongst them, allowing each of their fellow tribal members to hunt on tribal land on the reservations, which makes up roughly half of Oklahoma. Just with your tribal ID. Following state rules, regulations, which the tribes, for the most part have mimicked the state side to have a good connection with their wildlife partners. I was on the Tushka Outdoors podcast, I think about a month and a half ago, where we talked largely about sort of just my journey through wild food and my connectivity back to Choctaw culture through wild food and stuff like that. But we sort of like, there were nuanced mentions of like sort of the ongoing battle where the state is actually writing tickets and taking people to court, tribal members, if they don't have state hunting license, despite sort of the treaty rights that have been recognized, reinvigorated, I guess you could say, through Supreme Court decisions and higher federal courts, that yes, the tribes have the ability to regulate their own environmental resources, to include wildlife. So conversations going on, and actually look forward to that because I want to have them on the podcast to just talk through like what that process looks like, what they're going through, like how the greater outdoor world can help, because I think it's really important conversation, right? And we talk about conservation. I think who are some of the best conservationists? Woohoo. Mm-hmm. So anyway, there's lots of stuff going on, more indigenous led projects, more education, lots more collaboration, and probably some uncomfortable conversations too. But I think that's all really a good thing.
Yeah, definitely.
This episode is brought to you by Stouffer's. Here comes 3-time juggling champion Natalia Rogers. She's juggling law school, her TA job. Oh, narrowly catches the laundry. What's that 4th ball? Parents unexpectedly showed up at dinner time? Is that too much for Natalia? Not with Stouffer's Chicken Alfredo and its mouth-watering mix of Asiago, Romano, and Parmesan. When you're juggling 4 things at once and the clock strikes dinner, think Stouffer's.
Another big change that's really becoming noticeable lately is how, and we've kind of touched on it already, but how the tech world is integrating with the wild food world. So like wild food is no longer just like boots, knives, and camp stoves and your scouting badge, whatever. It's like phones and drones and mapping apps and thermal optics and live trail cams, cell service in the middle of nowhere, AI-driven plant ID, satellite messaging. It's all layered on top of traditions that are like thousands of years old, and sometimes they can mesh quite well, but other times they're kind of butting heads. I feel like we're officially in an era now, maybe as of the last couple of years and especially now into the coming 26, where wild food is fully entangled with technology. And I think one of the issues with that is the laws are trying to scramble to keep up with it because it's changing so fast. It's changing faster than lawmakers can possibly move. Yeah, it's kind of like developing into a crazy to kind of face world.
I'll say this, like drones, that's probably a good place to start. So there's a lot there. There's a lot to unpack. There's a lot of misinformation as well. A lot of people assume drones are fine as long as you're not using them to actually take the shot, which is not true in a lot of places. In many states and provinces, just using a drone to locate an animal, even after the shot, is illegal. That sort of reasoning always comes back to the fair chase. That's a very big foundation of the North American model. Wildlife agencies don't want hunting to become a video game with heat-seeking cameras and aerial spotting and things like that. And that's one of the biggest problems now, is that social media is sort of flattening all the legal boundaries, right? People see the content from Texas or Florida and accidentally apply those rules to Ontario, New York, California. And that becomes problematic because people don't really understand the interpretation and then are getting in trouble or misrepresenting the community and all these, there's just sort of like pushback. One thing I will say though, on the positive side of drones, is I've seen the use of it for locating animals after the shot in places where it is legal and licensed. We've had folks come on and talk about blood trailing with dogs, and there's a lot of movement in the space to use the thermal drones to locate downed animals, which has actually helped people recover the animals quicker. So they're not like losing meat or things like that. I do see that as sort of a positive, but then again, I do sort of agree with sort of the controls that are placed on it, because those aren't like I don't know, readily available like drones. Like there's some thought that goes into that and coordination, and you're learning to do that. And the people that are flying it are getting commercial drone license and things like that. So like still a bit regulated, which I think is good. So you don't have a bunch of drones zipping around the deer woods all the time, but a useful tool when you need it. And I've seen lots of people that have needed it. You know, there's probably times in my life I wish I had it. So. Yeah. Also, too, another one, as we talk about the different side, is like the cellular trail cameras. Feels like another little quiet revolution. There's been some movements by some of the states to ban them on public land. There's been, actually, there's like a bill up now for public surveillance on some public lands, which I think is really weird. But for a lot of people, they don't even have to go into the woods to know what's going on. You know, my friend Colin, when I was living on the East Coast, had a camera out at the place we hunted at, and like you'd get like an alert of like, oh, a deer coming through. One day we saw a black bear coming through, which was kind of cool. So it's wild when you think about it, because you're getting like real-time images of animals moving on your phone, sometimes days a week before the season opens. It's like that pre-scouting scouting. Some states have definitely like restricted or banned real-time transmission during hunting season because it starts to blur the line between scouting and like direct pursuit. But I don't know. There's a lot to unpack there. I don't know the right or wrong in it all. Like, it kind of is what it is, and I think it's up to the individual communities and the states to sort of manage how they want to do it. You know, the same thing can be said with silencers. There's been like sort of a silencer revolution as well. Or sorry, not silencers. Somebody's going to correct me under their breath while they're driving to work. Suppressors. In the fishing world also too, we see things kind of getting out of control as well, like forward facing sonar, live imaging, underwater mapping. Is that still fair chase, or is it just about like getting fish in the boat? There's also like a bigger question, right, as we sort of unpack this, and this sort of turns it all in there. Are we turning wildlife into data streams? Heat maps, movement patterns, predictive behavior. It seems like all this data you just dump in AI and they're like, yeah, Thursday at 9 a.m. is the best time to go shoot your biggest buck. What point does it change the entire spirit of why people hunt? And I think that's like a really important conversation when we start to peel back the layers of the onion or the banana, whatever layers you want to peel back. I don't know, Adam, what do you think? Would you personally feel okay relying on camera data to hunt, or does it cross the line for you?
It's a bit of a tough question, but I think it does cross some lines for me personally. I don't know if I want to speak for everyone, but I feel like a lot of these tools are better suited to biologists and conservation models rather than the hunters themselves. And the bear I got this year was partially result to like a live camera, or someone got a ping that there was a bear on that bait or whatever, and I was sent over there and I ended up getting a bear. And honestly, it cheapened the experience a little bit for me, to be truthful. There's way less like tracking and all these other skills. I see all these hunters kind of passing around the camera showing what's on their trail cans. It's almost like a Pokemon catch 'em all kind of thing. It's like these aren't collectibles. I think hunting should be a little more holistic and spiritual, and you got to be out there and you got to learn all these things. You got to make mistakes, and not just having the camera there to be like, oh, there's a deer there. I can just show up. Bam, there you go. I know it's not that easy, but it's getting to be easier and easier like that. And I'm probably for restricting that legally in terms of hunting, making it so that hunting remains the traditional sport that it is, and makes it a little more difficult. Not everyone can just, with $10,000 in their pocket, can just hunt way better than the guy without it. You know, like I don't like that advantage.
Jeez, I think that's always been there though.
Yeah, there has. You can't. Yeah, with a better gun or better gear. I don't know. Definitely public land, but I do see for problematic animals. Coyotes in the city, overpopulated pigs, like all that stuff, how using those, like, when we went snow goose hunting, they got rid of most of the laws surrounding waterfowl hunting in order to help reduce the population of snow geese. Mm-hmm. So you could use like electronic calls and overloaded shotguns and stuff. I see those tools like the cameras and live feeds and everything being a great tool to help combat invasive species rather than, hunting your whitetail for the year. That's kind of where I sit.
Yeah, and I mean, I think you've seen, I remember back, it was like maybe season 2 of the podcast, way back when we were talking with wild pig trappers in Texas, and like them using these sort of like regulated or traps, big giant octagon traps, and they would have like the gate open, all the pigs would come in, and they would get like a notification from a live stream, which would kick on when they came in, and they could watch, and they could count the number of pigs, do whatever. They'd let them do that for a couple of days, and then finally, like, he's like, literally, it, because they would come in, same time, tip the thing, my alert would go off on my live stream app, and I could punch a button on my phone and drop the gate. And he goes, then, I've sort of used it to, like, get this maximum number of pigs in this. He's like, then we know they're in the trap, then we go out there and we shoot them, and, like, we move on with the process. I think that's, like, a technological advantage that wouldn't have existed before to target sort of invasive species. And then both, like, I think the popularization of the air gun for, like, iguanas in Florida and things like that. Like, there's a lot. You mentioned electronic calls for snow geese. I'm just trying to think through, like, some other things that have helped out in the technology world. But it's interesting because those are sort of like these sort of smaller innovations versus like this larger movement of like cams and things like that. So
I was going to say another big one too is the identification apps on phones for foraging, and that's really changed the way we interact with wild food altogether, and how many people feel comfortable enough to do it. Add that AI kind of plant ID apps. I have them. Most people have them nowadays into the mix, and suddenly people take a photo, get a suggested ID, not a real ID, but a suggested one, and then they're chewing on something toxic with total confidence. It's not a good thing in some ways, and it's a good thing in others. But it can be terrifying, like people relying solely on AI to like eat something that they don't know is toxic or not. It's not the way to do that. These apps can, they can be really helpful. I use them sometimes to point me in the direction of what something is, but they are not at all a replacement for real field knowledge. And I think that's kind of the broader discussion we're seeing, that technology shouldn't and doesn't replace hard-earned field knowledge. Mm-hmm. And that comes with Butchery, like everything we've been talking about. And it really comes down to a mix of apps and books and foraging clubs and social media groups and mentors and all these different things that like slowly build yourself into becoming a successful hunter, forager, or whatever. These apps aren't necessarily bad. They're just kind of part of a broader toolkit that you should use, not the tool itself. But on the other side, it's enabling more and more people to try out foraging, which I think is a good thing, except that does in turn increase pressure on certain popular areas, including parks and protected spaces, which can be problematic. And as that, the pressure increases, we're definitely going to see tighter rules in more places. That's happening in high traffic parks. That's happening in, Minnesota and different parts of that area of the United States, which is like a forager's dream. You're seeing a lot of rules getting put in place on, foraging limits, permits, kind of a pay to pick. I can see that it helps reduce over harvesting, but if we're moving towards limit laws and permitting and pay to pick future, we're kind of leaving behind people with food insecurity issues that have used like foraging as a way to get free and healthy food to feed your family, and that's kind of problematic in a big way. I don't know if these apps are helping wild food education or replacing traditional knowledge or an education. Like, it's happening quick, so it's hard to tell.
Yeah, I don't know. It's something I have to monitor. I don't know how many times a week my kids ask me, "Hey, Dad, can you scan that?" And it's like you could literally you go to the easiest one is just going to like Google Chrome, and on the search bar there's like a little camera icon, and you can just like snap a picture of things and just pulls up a Google search of the images that are similar, and then you can add in keywords to build off of it. Like you mentioned, it's a big starting point, right? I think it's a good spot to begin, but it's not like the be all end all. I don't think I could comfortably like serve up some of that food without sort of fact checking it by somebody who knows. But I want to get into the last bit. We've talked on it a little bit about AI briefly, but I want to discuss something from like the perspective of like not a great thing, and that's like the AI generated hunting and foraging content, fake giant deer, fake trout, fake mushroom hauls. At some point people won't be able to tell the difference between real harvests and fabricated ones, which is a problem. And I think it's from the perspective too of like you've got older and younger generations that maybe don't understand that part of technology and they're taking that for face value, and like that share button gets hit a lot, or it becomes a reliance to like whatever's on my feed is truth, and there's not like a lot of fact check, and that ranges very wide in its age, and I think all ages too, not to just pigeonhole everybody. But the wild food culture is built on like trust and experience and reality, and when you start to sort of open the door to fake techniques or fake identifications or hacks, those could like actually sort of like hurt people, because people are taking that for face value, not really doing or understanding the research. And we're like, your thumb gets tired of scrolling, but it builds that memory, and you scroll and you scroll and you're like, holy shit, I've been scrolling for like 2 hours, and you're watching, what's real and what's fake. So when you put all this together, like drones, thermals, sonar, AI, foraging apps, cell cams, like what does 2026 really look like?
I foresee kind of tighter regulation. We're going to be seeing more laws coming into play that counteract what people can do with, like we said, cams and sonar and whatever. I think that's going to turn a lot of these gray areas we're kind of hanging out right now more black and white. And I think there's going to be more responsibility on the individual to know the rules too, because it's going to be, state by state, province by province, region by region. It's going to be difficult, and you're going to have to know the rules yourself. And it's not just whatever you get from AI. You're going to have to, do your research, as they say. I think ethically, we're going to be seeing a bigger split between people who use tech as like a tool to help modernize what they're doing and help, make better content or better whatever. And we're going to see people on the other side using it as a crutch and just depending fully on it and making stupid AI slop and doing all this stuff that's just, adding to the problems. And yeah, I think that's going to be, it's going to kind of drive people into two different camps. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see what actually happens.
Wild food's never been about shortcuts. It's always kind of been about effort and patience, weather, failure, humility, a lot of like soul searching and scratching the head and trying to figure out, and conversations. Technology can support that, but it can also erase it. So I'm going to leave it there. A lot to ponder, a lot to think on as you go into 2026. Thanks everybody for listening. We'll make these show notes available online. Whatever podcast platform you listen to, punch that 5-star button. Leave us a review. Tell us we're doing right, or tell us we're doing wrong. Thanks everybody. Have a good night.